For today and introduce Karen Perry. She is the broadband specialist with the NTIA, which is the National Telecommunication and Information Administration's Broadband USA. She's responsible for working with community stakeholders to develop new tools and programs to advance broadband deployment, adoption policies. Prior to being with the NTIA, Karen worked with Clarion Collaborative, a consulting practice that leveraged digital connections to strengthen and enrich communities. She worked for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where she's focused on expanding broadband to public libraries. And I know she worked here with Sue, advisor on the Broadband Opportunity Council report, capturing the commitments of 25 cabinet-level federal agencies to support broadband deployment. That by itself says a lot. She holds a master's degree in electrical engineering from Cornell and a BSEE from University of Washington. So Karen, this is your time. If you have trouble changing the slide, we'll do it on this side, but you have the floor.
All right. Thank you very much for coming together as a community to talk about broadband, and I really love the title of your session, Building Better Broadband Solutions. It's a great focus, and I do have some prepared comments. I've reserved some time for questions, but I welcome your comments. As Sue knows, I could kind of talk about broadband for longer than we've got on the agenda, so I'm happy to go off script if there's things that you specifically want me to cover. But I did prepare a general overview for you. First off, I wanted to tell you a little bit about what we do. The National Telecommunications and Information Administration is part of the U.S. Department of Commerce, and we're the part that advises the president on telecommunications policy. We have kind of three major functions. Our team focuses on expanding broadband infrastructure, adoption, use, and also building capacity for broadband policies and programs at the state level, as well as in communities across the country and businesses. We also have another arm of NTIA that works on expanding the use of spectrum, and another part that does research on broadband and internet policy and other telecom policies. We always have to put some statistics in our slide to talk really about the gap that still exists. This almost seems like a silly slide because I'm sure you're here because you know the gap exists. The other thing that's a little bit silly about this slide is probably all these numbers are a little bit worse in your district than they are on the national level. So 10% of Americans don't have broadband at home. That number is much higher in rural America, and it's much higher in the remote areas that are part of your district. A number of children, roughly 21 million children, don't have the bandwidth they need for digital learning. 34% of non-metropolitan healthcare facilities don't have the bandwidth that they need for sufficient broadband connectivity for electronic records and information exchange. And 42% of public libraries, and many of them in Alaska, I expect that's still true, have 10 megabits per second or slower connections. Those are some of the numbers that we oftentimes share because people care a lot about, everybody cares about education and healthcare. But some of the work that we did with the Broadband Technologies Opportunity Grant Program that Susan worked on and that I was able to work on as well, reminded us of the importance of broadband for supporting fishermen in getting information they know about fishing and about filing permits. It supports hunters in getting permits. It supports your firefighters in getting trained. If broadband is important anywhere, it is most important in areas that are rural and remote. Unfortunately, that makes it the hardest. So let's talk a little bit about the kind of work we do. Communities everywhere, not just in your area, face a number of challenges in their broadband efforts. And we kind of talk about them in a few different buckets. The first one is really kind of doing some landscape work. What are the key issues? What are the options and the opportunities? Who are the stakeholders? What are the assets you can bring to the table? In many cases, there is a conversation that needs to happen about why broadband is important to residents. I actually think we need to restate that. Most people realize that broadband is important, but it needs to be more than important. It needs to be something that's a priority and that's something that you're going to invest in. And that investment can be financial, it can be time, it can be assets, but these solutions, the hard solutions, aren't going to happen unless we all find a way to put some oomph behind that importance. And then we find that public-private partnerships or a range of partnerships are extremely important to broadband. Funding and partnerships really go hand in hand. And I was really pleased to look at your agenda because I can see a nice partnerships focus throughout your agenda. And that's pretty exciting. Again, the work that we do at Broadband USA is educate. I think of that more as collaborate. We convene and we assist. So what we're trying to do there is get you the information that you need to make sound decisions. We develop guidance. We have a number of toolkits, publications, documents, case studies that will help you more easily learn from others and kind of stand on their shoulders when you do your work. And we also convene and facilitate conversations. But we like it even better when you convene and facilitate conversations and we get to participate. So thank you for inviting us today. What we try to do in our team is we focus on these products, which are tools, best practices. I have links to some of them in this document, and I'll make sure you have them. We work with partners like our state libraries. Many states have a broadband leader, somebody who kind of is a broadband champion. The state of Alaska did have a broadband leader when it was funded as part of the stimulus funds. I don't believe you have somebody in that position right now. Given the importance in your communities across Alaska, that might be something that would be worth reinstating. And we also provide direct technical assistance to communities, to businesses, and to nonprofits. The kind of technical assistance that we provide more specifically is we support people who are doing RFP development, who are doing an asset inventory. What are the assets that you can contribute to a project? Doing digital inclusion surveys. We also support in identifying funding options and identifying partners. And we do some support. We won't do your network design for you, but we can review a network design. We can discuss permitting and interconnections. Most of our requests are in the area of broadband planning, but a lot of them are in the area of funding as well. This is just kind of a pictorial of some of the documents that we have created that describe different types of tools to help with your broadband planning. They're all available on our website, and I do have links in this presentation. One of the ones that's a big hit is our broadband planning funding guide. The federal government, at the time when we had the stimulus funds, my organization was lucky enough to have $4.2 billion worth of infrastructure, broadband infrastructure funds to distribute. And those funds were distributed for infrastructure developments, broadband planning, at the state level and mapping, as well as for public computer sensors and broadband adoptions. And Alaska benefited from all of those grants. We don't have those grants right now, so there's no real big pot of money other than the pot of money that the Federal Communications Commission manages as part of the Universal Service Fund. But what we've done with our funding guide is we've cataloged all the money that's available, what criteria is required to get it, and kind of provided links and information on that. And that money falls into a number of categories: infrastructure, planning, research, adoption, and public computers. I also wanted to point out that we do a monthly webinar, and the next webinar it's generally on, I guess that's the third Wednesday And the next webinar is specifically about funding solutions for digital inclusion programs. Digital inclusion programs are oftentimes hard to fund and sustain, as most any librarian will tell you. And so we're going to explore some of the innovative ways that happens. I also wanted to mention our last webinar. Even though it's historical, all of the information from this webinar is on our website and it's available for replay. This one focused on some of the great work that electric co-ops are doing to bring fiber to rural America. And as I noticed, your agenda does have an electric co-op thread going through this. So I thought that this might be worth listening to on the replay for some of you. Two of the ones before that, one was on broadband and economic development. I don't know if there's anybody not interested in that. And another one was specifically about smart agriculture and the impact of broadband on smart agriculture. I got to say that those replays are worth listening to if there's any of those topics are of interest to you. And the link at the bottom of the page is where the replays are available. I mentioned that at the time that we had the stimulus money, we had an opportunity to work with 50 states and 6 territories as part of this state broadband initiative. Those were states that had funding to do mapping and planning. Alaska was one of those states. After the end of the stimulus funds, this network kind of fragmented a little bit, but it's really rebuilding. So we have a monthly call with roughly 20 states, and we're seeing increased interest. We're seeing more states developing their own broadband planning or inclusion or infrastructure funding grant programs. We're seeing more states pick up new mapping, and even states that only have a single broadband champion or broadband officers are able to do an awful lot by just being a champion for broadband and sharing information both across the government and with communities across the state. So I am a big fan, and I believe we're going to be seeing a resurgence of state broadband leaders. So I wanted to let you know that this is an area we'd be happy to follow up with you on if there's any interest in Alaska and getting involved. The people who are involved right now, they're all kind of different. Some of them are in a real broadband office. Some of them are CIOs. Some of them are in public utility commissions or in extension services. Some of them, they're kind of all over the map. But what they have in common is that they are the broadband champion for their state. And they want to share best practices, policies, data. They want to work issues together, and they want to innovate. We do monthly calls, and we do have an annual meeting. And it turns out that this year's annual meeting is Valentine's Day, because we love our state broadband leaders. Actually, it's because it goes back to back with the NARUC conference of utility commissions. I'm sorry that this is such a wordy slide. We have a partnership with the National Science Foundation and the National Institute of Standards. And our organizations together have created something called the Global Cities Team Challenge. It's not just